Dairy producers provide excellent care for their cows during their lactation, and that care must continue when the decision is made for the cow to leave the farm as well. So this means assessing the fitness for the animal for transport and ensuring that she's sent to the right place. It also means having a clear idea of what the journey to their final destination might look like. So today we're talking with doctors Jennifer Walker and Lily Edwards-Callaway on Cull cow management and welfare. So thank you very much for joining me today. So we'll start off with my first question. If you could just give a brief introduction of yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and involvement in the dairy industry. So why don't we start with Jen?
Thanks again for having us. So Jen Walker. I'm a veterinarian by trade. I worked in private practice in California on some what most folks would consider large dairies for about 5 years before heading back to school. I did a PhD at Ohio State in focusing on udder health, but where I really gained my interest in animal welfare. Went on from there to work for Dean Foods here in the U.S., which was a dairy processor, developing and managing their animal welfare program for dairy, and then left in 2018 and have been with Danone North America since early 2018 and currently manage their animal welfare and milk quality program together under one umbrella for their milk supply, which includes about 700 conventional dairy farms and organic dairy farms across the U.S.
Okay, I'll go. So I'm Lily, and I was actually trying to think today how long I've known Jen for, and it hasn't been quite a decade yet. We're not quite at the decade mark, but we're getting close. So I'm an assistant professor at Colorado State University, and I focus on livestock behavior and welfare. So I do a variety of things. I teach, I do research, and I tend to really focus on the end of life for animals in general, whether that's slaughter plants or whether that's timely euthanasia on farm. So that's kind of where I spend most of my time. I think I got my main exposure to cull cows in the dairy industry really was on the plant side, so the slaughter plant side. I was the head of animal welfare for JBS for about 4 years. It's been several years since I've been there, but my exposure was really on that end. And now actually, as I've kind of moved through my career, I do spend probably more time on dairies, looking at timely euthanasia and that interaction between worker well-being and animal well-being.
Great. Well, thanks again for being here today. And it's an important topic that we want to get into. So cull cow management and transportation is really an inevitable part of the dairy industry and where most of our cows end up in the end. So it also has a large welfare implication for our cows. And certainly here in Alberta, it was recently identified as an area for improvement for our industry. So kicking off this topic, what got you both kind of interested in this research and this extension and the work you've done in cull cow welfare?
I'll let Lily.
Okay,
go ahead.
That's fine. I'll do it first this time, but you're going to get to go first a lot too. So, I guess I grew up from a non-agriculture background. So really when I moved out to Colorado to get my PhD was when I started experiencing all things food animals. And even then, I did a lot with swine slaughter. I did a lot with feedlots. But even then, I really didn't get a lot of exposure to kind of the cull side of the market. And it was really when I was at JBS and I got exposure to the, the plants that the cull cows go to, and really seeing some of the conditions that those animals arrived in is where I really became interested. And I think there's opportunity in that space. And to me, being part of this industry, the reason why I love it so much is because I think you have the ability to impact welfare of so many animals. And I think this space in particular is where, we can come together from university, academia, industry, and really make some good progress. So I think it's really kind of seeing those animals arrive at the plant is where I started really being interested in this area.
Yeah, and Lily mentioned that we've again known each other for almost 10 years, and we really met through a work with a common customer at the time with McDonald's, serving on their welfare council, and that work was around cull cows. And as a veterinarian in practice, timely euthanasia I've always seen as important, and I thought I understood fitness for transport, but it wasn't until after I had kind of moved away from that and spent some time with Lily and others working on the project that informed some of this paper on cull cows, and remember being at that plant in Wisconsin and seeing an ear tag of a cow that I knew exactly where that cow came from, and I saw the condition of that cow, and I still remember just thinking, wow, I never realized the cows that I said should be put on a trailer had to take that journey to get there. That's a long way to come, and to look in that condition, and or to be, severely lame, and to have to make that journey. It never dawned on me when I was in practice what that journey was. And I honestly didn't think about it in practice beyond she got on the trailer. I really thought that my job was done. As long as she got on the trailer, we're good, right? And so really it was about not understanding the journey, not understanding once she gets to the plant, what she has to manage there. There's still a lot of things to navigate there. So that's, I think, where it really sunk in, and again, working with folks like Lily, who shared a common passion for it, to realize how much better we had to do, and how much work there was to be done. And not for folks' lack of I think caring again, but just for a lack of knowing, because I certainly don't think I am a horrible person. At least I hope I'm not. But when I look back at some of the decisions I made in practice, they were horrible decisions, and I have to own that. But so just focusing on that. So I think that's kind of where it got kind of fed this specific area.
Yeah, and I think that statement will really resonate with a lot of our producers as well, who think that they're doing a great job. And, we'll touch a little bit more on the animal assessment before they leave the farm. But I think a lot of our producers, believe that they're doing a good job. And then when they leave the farm, that, wherever they head to next, they'll be taken care of. But just really not understanding what the cows go through or how long that journey might take, and, from when they leave the farm to slaughter. So I think it's important to address the reality of the situation, and then, as an industry, always strive for improvement. So we kind of know where we are, and now we need to know what, figure out how we can do better in the future. So I think that's very similar to what our producers feel.
Can I add one thing to that too?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that we being the industry have done a good job of starting to talk about that journey and what that might look like for a different cow and what that means to her. But the one thing I'm thinking now too, Jen, that I don't know that we've addressed necessarily in the things we've written about is like, then what happens at the plant? So it's like she gets to the plant and this is her condition, but we haven't actually shared a lot of what happens there either. And that is, that's another amount of time that animal is kind of in process. So I think to your point, I do think the awareness is growing, but there's still more.
Yeah. Yeah. And ideally, and hopefully what we'll kind of get out of this conversation is that it's really all down the chain. So it's not just the farmers who need to do better, it's everybody along the journey who needs to do better. And so not just placing the onus kind of in one area.
Oh yeah, it's everybody for sure.
Yeah. So for my next question, kind of getting a little deeper into it. So based, I guess, in the U.S. dairy industry where you both work, what are you seeing down there? Are most cattle going directly to slaughter, or most cattle, going to auction? Like, kind of what does the journey look like a little bit when they leave the farm? So I guess it's Jen's turn to go first.
We're just going to stare at the screen.
Yeah. This is where I think Lily probably does have a better command of the actual numbers. From my perspective, it really is geography dependent and farm size dependent. Even if you're a smaller farm relatively close to a slaughter plant facility, you're not going to be able to bring in one cow or two cows, right? So you're not culling that many cows. Larger farms have the ability to potentially put together a load to go direct, but that's kind of rare. So, and on larger farms, if they're too far away, that's not an option. So I would say the majority of farms really do rely on sort of their local sale barn, cow sale, or however. I think it goes by various names depending on where you're in the country or in Canada, but that's the majority, the most likely path. For that. I think I practice in California, and like I said, my practice was right across the street from sale barn, so you saw a lot of those cows come through every Tuesday and Friday, and again, things like that drive our decisions, right? We know that if I can only send dairy cull cows on Friday, right? So I start thinking through that and rationalizing some poor decisions. But even then, I assumed all those cows went to the plant 4 hours down the road in Fresno, Bakersfield, or wherever. And you know, again, to see that ear tag show up in Wisconsin blew my mind. Like I was looking at Lily like, why would we send a cow to Wisconsin? Like there's a plant 4 hours away. So yeah, a lot of different things are impacting that, but the majority of guys aren't gonna, or folks or farms aren't gonna put together a load to go direct. At least that's my experience.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. You know, the National Animal Health Monitoring System is a way that we capture some of that data. It doesn't, you know, we don't get data from every single dairy operation in the U.S., but it's for a decent proportion. And I think it was around a third of animals did go to a slaughter plant direct to slaughter from being culled from the dairy, but the difference went to a sale barn. And that's not to say that every single animal from that farm went directly to a slaughter plant, but they sent some that way. So I think, yes, probably the majority do not go directly. And then I think to Jen's point, it totally depends on where you are in the US, because I think, you know, in my experience, I've been to plants where I would say almost all of them come from a sale barn or auction market. And then I've gone to others where, you know, certain days of a week, they have some more local producers dropping them off, or they've established programs for direct dairy purchase. And usually those are, I think, larger dairies that can kind of put together a bigger group of animals. So yeah, I think a lot of them take at least one stop before they come to the plant. And I think when an animal leaves the location, they're like, oh, it's going to where it needs to be and it's going to be there soon. When I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Yeah. And so I think that's very similar for Canada and for Alberta as well. And then again, just kind of raising awareness on that journey. So on average, how long do you think a cow spends kind of, I guess, in the marketing system from when they leave the farm to when they arrive at the slaughter plant?
Well, Lily's you're good with, you'll remember like the actual numbers. Yeah.
I don't know if I am that good with numbers. So I will tell you that the National Beef Quality Audit has been able to capture data of transport time for the last leg of the journey. So I think it's about every 4 years, and in their cull cow and bull data, it's like an average of 7 hours, but that's just that last trip of the journey. So I think it's days. There actually has been some recent research coming out of Canada that says it's between 1 and 3 days that animal could be in the kind of marketing process. Yeah. So you might leave the dairy, go to a sale barn. It could stay in the sale barn overnight till a full load's kind of put together and then go to the plant. And so I think we're talking days. That doesn't mean it's not always that. It could be less, but I mean, it's a long time.
Yeah. And I guess then maybe speaking a little bit more to the vet side, Jen, if something that we don't consider, if they're spending, 1, 2, 3 or more days in the marketing system, how is that going to affect their, fitness for travel? Maybe they left the farm and it was looking pretty good. But, 3 days later, would that change, do you think?
No, I think that's critical because I think, I'll just take an example of displaced abomasum. I don't think anybody could argue it's not comfortable, right? And so, I mean, cows tell us they grind their teeth, other things that they do, and a lot of farms have decided or opted not to correct that condition, and instead send them to slaughter. But they often send them without because of that, not doing the correction. And so, for me to think of the fact that these cows have to spend another 2 days, if not 3 or 4 sometimes, with that painful condition, again, it's just kind of, it was an eye opener when, again, I put many of those cows on the trailer because, you look at her, she's got a DA, even if we did DAs on the farm, this cow wasn't a good candidate, right, for X number of reasons. So we decided to just ship her. And again, I in my mind, she went that day. In my mind, she was humanely killed this afternoon, tomorrow morning at the latest. And to think that cow would have to sort of manage that pain or endure that discomfort for an extra 2-3 days you know, it has never sat well with me. And so, and that goes with a lot of other things, whether it's, you know, some other internal injuries or you know, difficult calving where you think, well, she's just not going to do well, right? Well, she's still got to, whatever discomfort they're feeling is only going, I would imagine, would only amplify, right? So if she's severely lame, I think it was you and Cass had talked about some of that in the paper, and you know, that they're not laying down when they're traveling. So if she's severely lame, it's only going to feel worse, and we know that. And so I when I talk to farmers about it, you know, I just try to imagine whatever condition you're thinking about, it's only going to get worse during transport, and that's not really you know, I think a fair expectation of that we put on the cow to endure that part.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think to that point, if we like to Jen's comments, thinking about that journey, I think that's a hard journey no matter what condition you're in. You know, it could be long. You have to stand. Cattle are very highly motivated to rest and lie down, and so I think, you know, there's all the different marketing stressors that we try to minimize, and I think we do a good job. But I think it's hard no matter what. And then to Jen's point, when we have animals that shouldn't have been put in that spot in the beginning, it's just that much harder for them. And I think Jen said it perfectly. It's unfair for us to ask that of those animals.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. So I guess just to kind of really try to paint this picture clearly before we move on to some of the, you know, assessing animals questions. So could you be a little more specific on what stressors that these cows are facing while they're in transport or while they're in the marketing system before getting to slaughter?
Sure. I mean, I can name some of them, Jen, and then you can fill in the holes. But I think, you know, if we just think of an animal moving from its place of origin to the next stop, I mean, depending on how many stops, there's loading and unloading potentially multiple times. And so, whereas I think we have processes in place and hopefully good training to minimize that, it's critical that we do that because that animal is handled multiple times. Oftentimes they're mixed with other animals, and so just the stress of being exposed to other animals that they haven't been in an established group with. So, you know, a buyer would go to a sale barn. It might buy a couple cows there, and then put them together in a pen and onto a truck. Then you have the transport itself, which we've kind of talked about a little bit. New environments, you know, new sensory cues, and then it gets to a plant, which I think is another new environment. And I think, you know, depending on what process within that plant process, I think sometimes that can be loud. There's a lot of other animals there, and so, you know, those are some of them. I don't know, Jen, if you have others you want to add to the list.
Yeah, no, I think your last point, you know, it's interesting. I had a farmer who took a great deal of pride in the fact that his cows were always handled quite calmly. And if you went to his farm, it was quiet. We had a quiet parlor. People weren't allowed to whistle. And we went together to a sale barn because he wanted to see how that sale barn was doing. And he walked away and he just said that because we were arranging for a direct relationship, right? And he said, this is just not how my cows are used to being handled. And he's like, I don't want my cows yelled at. And so we figured out a different path, right? But you know, again, not everybody can do that. And so there's those changes just to what their normal is. But then, you know, from the lameness side, specifically, or any, like you said, their motivation to lie down, and then you add to that motivation to lie down. Who lies down more? A sick cow, right? So cows want to lay down, but when they're sick, they really want to lay down, and yet they're not going to on that ride. And I actually always think of, you know, I think Lily and I do a bit of traveling, or used to, for what we do, and you know, those every time I get on them, laugh at me, Lily. You know, the little trams at the airport, right, that take you from point A to point B. You have to hold on to something. And we have 2 feet. You got to hold on to something when they go. And I think of a lame cow standing there with a sore foot. They don't have, you know, anything to hold on to, nor could they if we gave them one. And if you've ever ridden the back of a trailer, you know, they don't know when the stop and go is coming. They don't know when the turn and the off ramp is coming. And so that's just, it's a difficult thing to navigate, and never mind you're surrounded by a bunch of other cows who might be equally unstable, or uncomfortable or tired or exhausted. And so it just makes it that much of a bigger challenge, I think, on the cows. I had that same farmer used to have an exercise, or I think he still does, of taking his employees. I hope OSHA doesn't have an issue with this, but he would put employees in the back of a trailer and ride them around the farm, and to show them like what it felt like to be a cow, so that they would drive more calmly and not so aggressively when they have cows in the trailer. And again, I think we just forget that to keep that perspective in mind of what that's like. So yeah, every time I'm on the DFW airport tram, I look around and think about lame cows and trailer rides. Sadly.
Yeah.
And you used to be there a lot, so.
I used to be there a lot. Yeah. And I spent a lot of time wearing an orthotic boot, lame. So maybe that's where it all started.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, you really identify with the lame cows.
Yeah.
So when cows arrive at their final destination, what are the most common things we might see in terms of, welfare issues or fitness for travel issues at the slaughter plant or at the auction marts?
So I think that the thing I'll say, I think the majority of cows are in good condition. They're culled for a variety of reasons. So the majority of them are in good condition, but some of the ones that are in poor condition, I would say lameness, as has been mentioned, to varying degrees. I think body condition score, engorged udders, like hock lesions or any sort of defect. I mean, that would impact the way the animal's moving through the environment. I'm sure I'm missing some. Jen, do you have any other top ones?
No, I think, and that's what kind of came out in the work that we did. It was mostly body condition, and the best we can evaluate lameness in that situation, and again udder condition as well. So those would be the big ones, I think that. I don't think we were surprised. When they had the data, we looked at it and we're like, yep, that's about right. And so that was a good thing about that. But yeah, I think that would be and to Lily's point, again, it's not that it's the majority are fine. I think, and that's when we think about it, we look at that. When you look at that small percent, you multiply that small percent by the number of cows we process. That number gets really big fast for the number of animals that had to endure a process. And so that's kind of where we kind of focus it on that end.
Yeah, I think sometimes thinking about the plant side of things too, you think about, can the cow make it like all the way through the handling facility? Oftentimes they're on a ramp going into the single file chute. And so kind of just the fact that we even have to ask that question, can she make it, through that standard well-designed handling facility, I think kind of gives us an answer to maybe those animals shouldn't be there.
Yeah. So I guess now switching a little bit more onto the decisions that are made on farm. So in your experience, how are producers deciding to cull animals? And do you think that they're considering the right criteria when they're making those choices?
This is all Jen.
I think they're doing better, but I would say if I'm gonna make broad brushstroke claims, so all the dairymen could hate me for that, but I think the reality is, what do we typically see on the farm? Unless a cow is like a standout, right? They like, oh, again, like she's that DA you didn't want to fix for this or that, and comes to your attention. There a lot of it is we're looking at a list, and did she go down in milk production? Where is she in milk production? We just did our weekly or monthly pregnancy check, who's open, who's not, and so it's all of those things who then drives this list of cows that we're looking at to sell, and then we start thinking of these other things, and so and all of those things are then impacted by things like milk price, by things like the beef price, by things like how many cows do I have? Am I overcrowded? Do I have the space? Do I need the cows? What does the banker want? The banker wants me to have this many cows. There's all these things that are coming in to this decision instead of just saying this cow, right? And so in really focusing on the cow that's in front of you. And in farms we oftentimes rely, there's I think we oftentimes don't help ourselves because there's this habit of thought, and we say it a lot in dairy, and I'll admit it drives me crazy. We always say, of course, we take good care of our cows. If we wouldn't, they wouldn't produce, right? And so the reality is a lame cow can milk 80 pounds, right? 100 pounds of milk. And so if we're waiting for the milk to go down before we see something about that cow to tell us I need to act, then we're already too late. And so we tend to rely too much on the numbers and changes in that. And so I think part of it's trying to find a better system. And Lily and I have talked. My mantra for that is making better decisions sooner. A pushback we get when we start talking about fitness for transport is, well, you're just going to have to kill more cows. No, I hope not. I hope we learn to make better decisions sooner. I hope that we look more closely at the right things in cows, and we start looking for those things and not waiting until she's dropped so much in milk, or deciding that even because she's lame, I'm not going to sell her because she is milking 80. So I'm going to wait until she's only at 40 or 30 or whatever your magic number is, where again, your feed costs and milk price is some magic formula in some spreadsheet that somebody gave you. And we sell her when she needs to be sold, even if she is milking 60 pounds or 80 pounds. Because if we wait till it's 30, she's too lame or she's too thin. And so I think that's the challenge is I don't underestimate the impact and influence and need to certainly look at cost and profit. But this is, to me, this is certainly that should be a non-negotiable on the dairy about when sometimes it's a loss, and sometimes and that's part of the cost of doing business in a way that we can look at and withstand scrutiny, and be mindful of that. So at least that's my you correct me.
No, you are totally correct. I think the one thing that you made me think of that I hadn't always actually articulated in my head, but you make the decision to cull, and that's a different decision, or it's a different time point in that animal's kind of last days on the dairy than when it's actually going to slaughter or to the sale barn or whatever. And so that could be days. Like, I don't know, Jen, if you know how long. I think it probably depends on when there's a sale or when there's a full load. But I think if she's fit for transport when the decision is made to cull, that doesn't necessarily mean she's going to be fit for transport when it's time to transport her.
Yeah, there's lots of, particularly on some larger farms, where they might, put them aside in this group to be culled. But even on the smaller farms, again, like I said, like the sale barn that we operated across from, dairy cows came in, I think it was Tuesdays and Fridays. So if it was Tuesday afternoon, she's not going anywhere till Friday. And so depending on what that problem is, it could get worse. And so I think that's definitely a challenge on most of the farms, because I think most sale barns kind of function that way, where they have certain, they have dairy days and cull cow days and heifer days, and so it really starts driving. Again, it starts, those things, those external factors start driving poor decisions on that. So.